Greetings of the day. Welcome to Parak. Today, I, Deepak Tenguria, as you know, we have been doing an interview series from last 50, in the lockdown. And today, I'm very privileged to have a personality of yours, teacher Mr. Thapar. Greetings to the program. And I really feel very privileged to have you on the show. Thank you. And thank you for taking your time to us.
A
Today,
pleasure, Deepak.
as you know, Mr. Thapar is a journalist from last 40 years. He have been doing journalism in England and then came to India in 1989. He have written wonderful books, Devil's Advocate and Salt and Pepper. And today we are talking about the media and the New Republic and its way forward. So, Mr. Thapar, as you begin your journalism on the onset of journalism in 1991, and you came to India in 1989, and we are sitting in 2020. So you have been privileged enough to see the both sides of the media, the changing of the media, the coming of the liberalization. So how do you recognize the change of the media, particularly Indian media, and if I may call so the Thapar years?
Well, the media in India over the period that I've been working as a journalist has progressed enormously. It's become wider, it's become deeper. Television has happened. There was no private sector television when I came back in 1989-90. At that time, the only form of television for the private sector was through videos. There were two video magazines called Newstrack and Eyewitness. They would circulate through video libraries or through subscription. Now we have independent television. We have over 400 news channels. We have 800 other channels, entertainment channels. So the media is a much bigger universe, a much richer universe, a more colorful universe. However, there are questions that you can ask about the quality of television news. It is not uniformly good. Some aspects of television news are frankly deplorable. There are other channels that are striving to be much better. But unfortunately, we do not have a single channel that can compare with either the BBC or CNN. That is one of the sad things. We have some very good television journalists, but they are surrounded by channels where the same quality is not reflected. So, as I began by saying, there is no uniformity of excellence in television news.
All right. Okay. And this question intends me to ask you. The second question is mine, and I want to ask you, sir. As we have a lot of intellectual, significant part of society is saying right now that the media, which is supposed to be the watchdog, is now the lapdog of the government. There is no critical scrutiny. There is no checks on the those who are in power. So how can we suppose to the way forward in which the media remain uninfluenced? Remember, I do not use the word uninteracted. I'm using uninfluenced. How can the media remain uninfluenced of the political those authorities?
Well, at the end of the day, the media will remain uninfluenced by the government if the media has the capacity to stand up for the principles of journalism. It's the failure to stand up for those principles that leads to channels kowtowing to the government, behaving like lapdogs of the government rather than guard dogs of freedom, democracy, and the rights that we have inherited through our constitution. And therefore, at the end of the day, it is up to channels, it is up to channel editors, but most importantly, it is up to individual journalists to live up to what they know is expected of them, what is required of them. When they do live up to it, you will have good quality independent journalism. When they don't live up to it, and sadly, there are many television channels and also a few newspapers where they don't live up to it, and as a result, you have journalism that is partisan, journalism that is defensive and supportive of the government without any critique, journalism that pretends to be journalism but is actually propaganda.
Okay, and this is very, I mean, the supposed answer. Okay, like Mr. Thapar, I am a millennial kid, and I was born in the millennium of 2000. I want to ask this question to you particularly. The new journalism student that are catering to that will serve journalism in the current future. What do you think they should learn from all these, particularly the saga
The
going on
middle of
right
your
now in this
question, I
country?
couldn't follow. So can you repeat the question again? Your sound broke up in the middle. And you need to speak slowly.
Oh, I apologize. Okay, I apologize. Okay, I want to say, ask you, sir, as I was born in the new millennium and I'm a millennial kid, and many of my friends were. So, what can the new journalist should do and should I mean, like, what they should do when they see that the political authority is encroaching over them, and how can they survive the pressure? Because that's the most thing that many of my journalist friends used to
Journalists
ask.
need to stand up for their rights, but it's not easy to do unless you have the support of your bosses, the owners of the paper, the editors who run the paper. Because at the end of the day, those are the people who will decide the policy of the paper. So from the very top, not from the very bottom, journalists need to
Yeah.
assert their independence, assert their right to criticize. But this is very important. You need to be fair. You need to give people who you criticize an opportunity to respond. You need to be accurate. And most of all, you need to ask the question, have I covered all the relevant aspects of the story, or am I selective in what I'm choosing to cover? And as a result, am I portraying a partial or a not proper view of the matter? Those are critical questions you need to ask yourself. But at the end of the day, so, true journalist is someone who is true to himself and tells the story as he knows it to be true, having confirmed the facts, having ensured that he's balanced, having given people who he's criticizing a chance to respond. Those are important journalistic things to do. When you do it, you will be a good journalist. But if you don't do it, then you will be a weak journalist, you will be a partisan journalist, you will be a journalist who doesn't tell the full story.
Okay, and I'll remember. Thank you, thank you. I'll remember this in my whole journalism lifetime. Okay, Mr. Thapar, I read your book Devil's Advocate that I read in Hindi, but it is also in English for my viewers. I want to ask that wonderful question about, I mean, that interview particularly. Uh, as the infamous and famous interview of Narendra Modi of 2007 when I was studying third class. Do you think, Mr. Thapar, that politicians should be given a warm-up gesture, like you begin by asking easy questions, you begin by asking hard questions should come, or do you think no, we should, as like the media interviews that we are doing right now, that most of my seniors are doing, we should ask tough questions right at the beginning and then let away. So
No, why should
the
you ask
politicians
an
should.
easy question? Politicians are there to answer questions from us. They need to be accountable to us. The job of a journalist is to make a politician accountable. What is the point of an easy question? It's a waste of time. A politician should be informed of the subject that he's being questioned about so that he can prepare himself. Don't tell him the questions, obviously, but you have to tell him what subject you're talking to him about. And after that, ask him whatever you want, provided it's a justified and legitimate question. Why do you need to throw little socks at them to sweeten them or soften them? I don't understand.
Exactly. Okay, and Mr. Thapar, as you know, you are very famous for doing very interviews that are very hard question, tough questions. So, may I please ask you, what are you? I read your book completely. What are your two interviews that you want to remember? That you remember, of course, when you're in the free time, in the evening time, having a cup of tea. Like you remember that, yeah, these interviews were perfect. That I should remember these, and I mean these
No,
interviews.
Deepak, I don't spend my spare time or my evening time over a cup of tea thinking about my interviews. I don't look back
Okay.
on my career in terms of interviews that I like or don't like. Those are jobs that I'm doing. When they're over with, I move on to the next one. I don't spend too much time reflecting on my career and asking myself, did I like it? Did I do well? When it's done and over, I've moved on.
Okay, Mr. Thapar, as we are having a very short of time, I want to ask this to you. When you and you have doing journalism of interviews and from many time, Mr. Thapar, how you decide interview? I mean, the selective of question. How you select the questions? You, I mean, I'm not asking you to give me the code or the secret of selecting questions, but what you keeps in mind that I should keep this question, I should not keep this one. What is the segregation part of
So there's no
your
secret.
thought?
You need to know the subject you're talking about. You need to have researched it and read about it. And then a whole lot of questions will occur to you. And all you need to do is to structure them so that there's a sense of flow between question one, two, three, and four. And secondly, also some sense of development. It will be quite apparent to you when you've done your reading and your research what is important and what is unimportant. And obviously, you will prioritize what is important and drop to the bottom or drop all what is unimportant. There's no secret to it. This is something that will happen quite obviously and naturally when you have made the effort to read and research yourself.
All right. Okay. Let's move on to my last question, which I'm thinking from like while now. Sir, as you see the journalism current ecosystem of the democracy, when we see the petty things by the government like lodging FIR and complaints on the journalists who are doing good journalism, boycott, like you were example, you boycotted by the BJP, and this is something, entire state is lodging on one person. So how do you think India's democracy will survive when its fourth pillar is being so crumbled and so crushed by the authoritative those in
But
power?
it's not a very good thing that politicians seek to boycott journalists or to create pools of journalists who are their favorites, who become the only people to whom they give interviews or they give access, and to avoid giving interviews or access to others who they think are critical of them. It doesn't reflect well of our democracy, and it reflects even more poorly of our politicians. Um, at the end of the day, the media has a role to play because it informs, it gives an opportunity to politicians to be questioned on behalf of the people, and that is equally important.
Hmm,
Thirdly, the media reflects
hmm,
public opinion. It's therefore incumbent on
hmm,
politicians to make themselves accountable, to make themselves accessible, and even a President Trump who castigates
hmm,
news
hmm,
like the New York Times and the Washington Post or CNN as fake news, nonetheless does make himself available to these papers and others fairly regularly for interviews. What he says and how he conducts himself at that interview is another matter, but he is available to be questioned. Unfortunately, that is not the case in India. Our Home Minister only chooses to give interviews to people he considers his favorite journalists who he knows will not ask
hmm,
awkward questions that he doesn't want to answer or will not persist in a way in which he would find embarrassing. So he has that comfort and assurance of being handled with
hmm,
soft kid skin gloves. The Prime Minister very rarely gives
hmm,
interviews. When he does, again, it is to channels or to anchors or to journalists that are pre-chosen. The interview runs
hmm,
on in a way in which the Prime Minister seems to set the agenda rather than the interviewer. The Prime Minister is
hmm,
never interrupted, even if he's gone way off the subject. His answers can go on for
hmm,
5 or 10 minutes, and clearly they're not answering the question, they're simply making statements. That is not how
hmm,
interviews are conducted. And frankly, when the Prime Minister does that, he should be politely interrupted and brought back to the subject he was questioned about. That doesn't happen either. So, until journalists get the gumption and the strength to question honestly, firmly, but politely, and until
hmm,
politicians realize that it is part of their moral duty to answer questions honestly to the extent to which they can. I'm not saying politicians should reveal everything they know, obviously they can't. Until that happens,
hmm.
you're going to find that our democracy will not flower in the way in which we have seen Western democracies flower and bloom and blossom.
Okay, last but not least question. If you may choose to answer, please. What are you writing next? I mean,
I
in
don't
terms
have
of
a
book
book
and
in mind, and I'm not writing anything at the moment.
okay, Mr. Thapar, it's been a fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much, Mr. Thapar, for making time your
Thank
time
you,
to
Deepak.
it. Thank
It's
you
a
so
pleasure.
much. I feel pleasure.
Thank you, Deepak.